right. I see the numbers are still getting higher and higher as people are coming in and joining the session. I think that I am going to start us off because we want to use every minute of this time for this conversation, and we want to leave time for Q&A as well. So welcome everyone to the final panel of day 2 of No War 2023. This panel is on the topic of nonviolent resistance to the ongoing war in Ukraine. And I'm excited to welcome Charles Johnson to be the moderator and to introduce this panel. Charles is a co-founding member of Nonviolent Peaceforce's Chicago chapter. He's the organizing director of Chicago Area Peace Action, and he is also a key organizer in the Divest Chicago from the War Machine campaign, which I have the pleasure to work with him on, to working towards divesting the city of Chicago from weapons. So the floor is yours, Charles.
Thank you so much, Greta, and thank you everyone for joining us. We are really excited to have you all here, and this panel is on nonviolent resistance to war in Ukraine. We have 3 excellent panelists with us, and so I'll introduce them in just a moment. Just to let you know, my own engagement with this topic includes being in cities near the war's front line, learning from communities there as part of the nonpartisan Zaporizhzhya Protection Project. So you'll hear a little more about that project during our panel. And now to our awesome panelists. So I would like to introduce you to Zaira Zafarana. And Zaira works on human rights, disarmament, nonviolence, and a culture of peace. She collaborates with activists and human rights defenders in partnership with local and international organizations in advocacy, awareness, and solidarity initiatives. She is the representative at the UN of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation, and last June, she collaborated in the realization of the Vienna Peace Conference on the war in Ukraine, together with the International Peace Bureau, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Code Pink, and Europe for Peace. Zaira has worked together with War Resisters International, European Bureau for Conscientious Objection, and Connection EV on the launch of the Object War campaign, which calls on Europe to protect objectors and deserters from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And she is currently in charge of international relations for MIR Italy, the Italian branch of International Fellowship of Reconciliation. And she has also been a member of International Coordination for a Culture of Peace and Nonviolence. So thank you so much, Zaira, for being with us today. And our next panelist we will be hearing from is Yurii Sheliazhenko. Yurii Sheliazhenko, PhD, is a member of the board of directors at World Beyond War and is based in Ukraine. Yurii is executive secretary of the Ukrainian Pacifist Movement, is a board member of the European Bureau for Conscientious Objection, and a council member of the International Peace Bureau. He obtained a Master of Mediation and Conflict Management degree in 2021 and a Master of Laws degree in 2016 at Croak University. In addition to his participation in the peace movement, he is a journalist, blogger, human rights defender, and legal scholar, an author of academic publications, and a lecturer on legal theory and history. And he has been a facilitator for World Beyond War's online courses. Yurii is also a winner of the International Peace Bureau's 2022 Sean McBride Peace Prize. So we're so thankful for your presence with us today, Yurii. And our third panelist is John Reuwer. John is a member of the board of directors of World Beyond War. He is a retired emergency physician whose practice convinced him of a crying need for alternatives to violence for resolving tough conflicts. This led him to the informal study and teaching of nonviolence for the last 35 years, with peace team experiences in Haiti, Colombia, Central America, Palestine, Israel, and several US cities. He has worked with Nonviolent Peaceforce, one of the few organizations practicing professional unarmed civilian protection in South Sudan. Dr. Reuwer currently participates with the DC Peace Team and as adjunct professor of peace and justice studies at St. Michael's College in Vermont. He has taught courses in conflict resolution, nonviolent action, and nonviolent communication. He also works with Physicians for Social Responsibility, and John has been a facilitator for World Beyond War's online courses War Abolition 201 and Leaving World War II Behind. So now we will begin our panel, and we'll start by hearing from Dr. John Reuwer.
Thank you, Charles. I'll turn my video off now, so the audio will be a little better, because I'm in part of Ukraine where sometimes the internet is unstable. Thank you for having me. And I just want to say, I think this is the current conflict in the world where thinking of nonviolent alternatives is the toughest. So it's really great to see this panel trying to put forth the best face that we can in a really, really tough situation. So what I want to talk about is the Zaporizhzhya Protection Project, of which Charles has been part and which Yurii has been part. And we'll be talking about where that came from and where we are with that project now. So I'm going to share screen with my slides and give you an update. Some of you may have heard before what the project was about, and we'll go over some of the background, but then talk about where we are with the project now. So this project was born of my experience when I went to Ukraine in September, October of last year, looking for who in Ukraine was doing things other than just fighting the war to keep themselves safe. Ukraine had a long history of nonviolent resistance. They freed themselves from Russia without destroying their country in 1991. They had a revolution in 2004 that was almost exclusively nonviolent to overthrow an illegal election, and knew in polls that civil resistance was one way to resist. And we saw a lot of those images coming out of Ukraine in the first weeks of the war, before the militarism took over everything. So it was really tough to find people interested in anything other than military solutions in Ukraine. Yurii and the Pacifist Movement was certainly the highlight. But also, while I was there, I discovered the work of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And I want to explain why that has to do with peace, starting with people who aren't necessarily peaceniks at all. And now we're at the point where we have 10 months experience following what's happened at this nuclear plant, why that's special, training a team that could add a measure of safety around the plant if that becomes possible, and a team investigating conditions within the site of the plant now. So for anybody not familiar with the Ukraine, it's the largest country in Europe outside of Russia. And this is a map of roughly the relatively unchanged part that's been Russian occupied since the first months of the war. And I want to point out that it has a number of nuclear power plants, which are very fragile things especially in wartime. And we're focused on Zaporizhzhya. So that's the plant right here. And as you can see, it's right on the front line between two warring parties. And that makes it a very special place. Just roughly an aerial view of the plant shows the 6 red dots here are the domes of the big reactors. This is the largest power plant in Europe. It supplied 20% of all Ukraine's electricity and is surrounded by water, which is needed for cooling and things like these cooling ponds, and then on-site storage of large amounts, 37 years of radioactive waste. The two dangers from radioactivity at this site are from the reactors themselves. So these are the huge reactors that generate about 800 to 900 megawatts apiece. That's a lot of power. They get very hot. If one of those is disturbed, it creates a Chernobyl-like situation, which, as we know now, has a 2,600-kilometer exclusion zone from one reactor going bad there. Luckily, they've had time since the war started to shut all these reactors down, so they will no longer have a Chernobyl-like explosion. Instead, they, like 37 years of nuclear waste on site, is enough to create an enormous dirty bomb that could pollute large areas of Europe and Eurasia and would eventually reach around the world if enough was disturbed. That waste is stored two ways: in liquid cooling pools, which are nothing more than swimming pools that are not in strong containers and could be disturbed rather easily, and then in dry caskets when they're a little less radioactive. So there's both dry and wet storage, enormous amounts. When the Russians attacked the plant, they attacked it in a way that nobody thought anybody should or could. And this is a hole in one of the buildings very near the reactor cooling ponds when the UN inspectors finally got there. So this is Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. He negotiated for 6 months with the Russians to allow his international inspectors on site. A real amazing coup in diplomacy and a real hope for the possibility of negotiations. And so when I read that he was there and successfully got into the treaty, I thought he had these 14 men went in with him originally, 14 international atomic energy experts who were unarmed civilians now on the front line of a war behind to the Ukrainian enemy lines, behind the Russian lines. And they're the only people that I'm aware of that in Russian-controlled territory are allowed to say publicly that this is a Ukrainian facility. They hold to that. And it's just an enormous coup. It shows the possibilities. So I thought these guys who probably have never heard of nonviolence and don't consider themselves peace activists are specialists in unarmed protection. So I thought those of us who study and practice this could offer some assistance. So he has been first thought there should be a safety or a demilitarized zone around the plant, which of course would be the best idea. And he worked with almost everybody, had everybody's ear, from Putin to Zelensky to the Pope. And he's very well respected. And he managed to get his inspectors there, but has not been able to create that zone. His calls and appeals have gone unanswered, to the point where he gave up on a safety zone and said, well, if we follow some safety principles, and he presented these at a UN conference that I watched, and simple things like no heavy military equipment that could be used to attack anything else, no attacks on the plant, no attacks on the critical power of electricity and water coming into the plant. So after training for some months, we finally got an invitation to go into one of the cities on the Ukrainian side, very near the plant, so we could learn more. And we weren't sure we could get all the way there, but we did manage to. So just a team of 4 of us started out from Eastern US, went to Warsaw, then to Kyiv. And then if you can follow the map here from Kyiv, where Yurii lives, right up in the upper left, down through Dnipro, stayed there for a while, and then Zaporizhzhya, where I am right now, the city of Zaporizhzhya. It's a very large industrial city. And then where you see where the red tower is where the nuclear plant is. So in Zaporizhzhya, it's a modern city, not quite as well kept as Kyiv or even Dnipro, but a lot of culture here, a lot of history, and to my eye, relatively unscathed for being 40 kilometers from the Russian lines. This is Claire. This fellow on the left is Alexander Pavlov. He's a journalist who followed the war in the Donbass for 8 years and helped translate us for a couple of days with people we interviewed, like this young lady here. And this Sister Lucia, by the way, this was in April. I met with Sister Lucia again yesterday, and we questioned, these are other members of our team. You see Charles here and Peter Lumsden. The most amazing thing we heard in Zaporizhzhya was people from Enerhodar, that is the city where people work on the nuclear power plant, stopped the Russians for 4 straight days just by blocking the roads with trucks and equipment from the city and tires, and put their bodies out there 4 days in a row, and the Russian tanks turned around and left. And then on the 5th day, they fired some warning shots after the people had left, and then attacked the military checkpoints and attacked the nuclear plant, which fell in just a few hours. So where we went then, if you see the nuclear power plant here, this is its big cooling pond. The plant is here. The city of Enerhodar is right here. And its sister city of Marinets is where the smiley face is here. And this is the town where we spent. So there used to be a very large reservoir here until the dam down to the left broke. And now this is mostly mud flats and a small river. So we went to Marinette's. This is the fellow who invited us in. An interesting, it was a Soviet conscientious objector, very interesting fellow. The town was in amazingly good shape. The parks were reasonably well kept. People were living pretty normally, and you didn't see a lot of destroyed buildings, but it didn't take long to notice the damage everywhere. This is a crater of a missile that hit in the middle of a playground and destroyed it. This is what happens to the housing nearby. They lose all their windows. And it's not just windows. This throws shrapnel through those windows that kill people. So we met with lots of people, pastors and the local hospital, all of which seemed to be in better shape than I thought a frontline city would have. And then this church hosted a couple of people from an organization that I think is best characterized as a civil defense organization. People that don't use weapons, but they assist civilians and the military in whatever way they possibly can. And ultimately, it's this fellow who invited us back and who we'll be seeing this week. You're not allowed anywhere near the front, of course, of the plant, but this fellow had some access and got us to within a view where you could see across the river and the cooling towers way in the distance here. And I just show this to, there was a worldwide Quakers that were praying for us the whole time, and they said there was a spiritual dome over the nuclear power plant. They created this little symbol for us of the 6 reactors, and our motto became seeking safety for all in the 3 languages. So what we're thinking now, everybody agrees that the plant needs to be kept safe. There's no argument about that. The idea of civilians creating a safety zone was out of almost everybody's imagination. Everybody said we're glad we're trying, but remained totally skeptical. The only person that said we ought to talk more about this is Oleg, the fellow from the Civil Defense Force that invited us back. We all agree, though, that Russia has to be involved because they control the plant. Since that meeting, we did go to Russian officials who at first told us we were crazy, but then actually listened to us for some time at the embassy in Washington, D.C., and thought about it for a couple of weeks, but ultimately denied us getting visas in to talk to the Russian side. So now we'll be headed back into Marinette's to see what could be done from one side to bring it about. So this is our current team. There's Fred from Japan, Amy from Baltimore, John Fairfield from Virginia, and me from the DC area. And we spent all day yesterday and large part of the day interviewing people from Enerhodar. So we'll be in Marinette's on one side, the Ukrainian side of the plant. Enerhodar is on the other side. This was a young engineer who told us the whole story, corroborated how they absolutely held the army off for that long, and everything that happened since the capture. So, we're a small organization. We started with about 50 volunteers back in December, but not getting a mission. Nobody invited us in or offering us money to do this work. Has had some attrition, but we've had a really faithful core group. We would have had 8 on this team, and that's a longer story, but basically we looked for people that were from Iran and Africa and India and South America that would have been thought more friendly to Russia to go in on the Russian side. And they're still waiting if that possibility arises. So we're nonpartisan. Everywhere in Ukraine, people, we need the war, we need the war. This is the one place that we don't have to argue that nonviolence is better than violence. Everybody agrees we need a nonviolent solution. We're just not sure what it is. Our challenges, of course, is that we have no official recognition. The International Atomic Energy Agency knows we're here. They like what we're doing, but they cannot officially endorse us in any way because their position with the Russians is so critical, and they cannot allow any distractions from that. And of course, unarmed civilian protection has not been tried to defend infrastructure before. And so we're really pushing the envelope, trying to get anything going here. And our biggest challenge is this. So while we visited the mayor of Enerhodar, who led that amazing resistance, there was artwork all over the place in this center he works. And it's typical. So this is a woman in traditional Ukrainian dress with the Ukrainian flag, but with a Molotov cocktail in one hand. It just represents people's belief that violence is the only way. So our hope is that people are getting tired enough of the violence that they really can sit down and strategize for other ways of doing things. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, John, for sharing what you have shared from Zaporizhzhya, where you are now, and Hopefully there's a lot of questions that can come into the Q&A box, so please feel free to send those in and we'll address during our Q&A portion. And so now we'd like to hand it off to Yurii Sheliazhenko. Yurii?
Yes, one moment. I will share my screen. Here it is. I hope you see it. Dear friends, thank you for coming to this panel. And first of all, I must say that I am so grateful to many of you for your support in hard situation when peace movement in Ukraine is pressured by Zelensky security service. Petition for stopping persecution, which unfortunately targeted my personally. This petition, which John Reuwer and friends delivered to Kiev, is amazing. It gathered more than 10,000 of signatures. Many people throughout the world wrote letters to Zelensky at the War Resisters International website. Again, this petition at the World Beyond War website is so powerful. It was hard even to find envelopes to send printed variant, because a big envelope is needed to submit it. Anyway, as you know, during hearings in Kiev Court of Appeal, prosecutor failed to appear because he knew that the world is watching. But to give you update, criminal case is not closed, unfortunately. I'm still under house arrest, and this persecution still threatens to end with punishment, which means 5 years of prison and confiscation of property. Our militarists just wait when the world will look in other direction. Let's hope they will be disappointed. To the topic, I will talk today about perspectives of nonviolent resistance to war in Ukraine. To give short summary, I will argue that war is a lose-lose phase of conflict. We need to return to win-win phase since we need peace, and nonviolent action is not enough. We need to strengthen nonviolent identity of civil society, because militarist society can't be civil. It is uncivil society. Then I will say a few words how they persecuted me for a dream about the world without wars and what lessons could be learned from it. And I will tell how to make the dream happen in my view. Yesterday I heard brilliant presentation of Jürgen Johansson, as you do, and we saw that for him conflict is something good, like our life itself. Dr. Johansson want to hijack conflicts and make them anything but war. Engage more people into non-violent conflict, non-violent resistance. He calls it escalation, expansion. But in conventional terminology, conflict escalation means rather escalation of violence than of social cohesion. And its other stage is war, usually described as armed conflict. In Friedrich Glasel's model, any conflict has 3 phases and 9 stages. I have not enough time to explain all details, but these 3 phases are describing mutual attitude of parties to the conflict, which could be win-win, intention to achieve mutual gains, win-lose, intention to gain at expense of other, and lose-lose, intention to harm other at the cost of self-harming or even self-sacrifice if needed. At win-win phase, you care about the other. At win-lose phase, you compete with the opponent. And at lose-lose phase, you fight the enemy. When you stop caring about others and oppose, it is a first step towards enemy image. And it, of course, leads to violence after a while. I have article explaining how this happened in Ukraine-Russia relations. On this slide, you see escalation ladder, which show how relations were broken and bloodshed started. In 1991, Ukraine and Russia arrived as new independent nations on the ruins of Soviet Union. They built friendly relations when restrained their ambitions, Russian ambitions to be Godzilla at post-Soviet state, Ukrainian ambition to integrate into the West and minimize any relations with supposedly not very safe relation with Russia and so on. Of course, it is, I'm describing rather attitude of elites because people is more peace inclined. Anyway, then when friendship was not developed enough, they started to compete, encouraged by Western and Eastern powers, and then militarism prevailed because after the dissolution of Soviet Union, Soviet militarism remained. Nuclear weapons in Russia remained. Ukraine got rid of nuclear weapons, and it was good. I am not agreeing with some revanchists who think Ukraine should become again nuclear state. And conscription, military patriotic upbringing, this legacy of highly militarized state, which was Soviet Union, it remained, and it is the main cause of unrestrained escalation. Because without this militarist culture, it would be very hard for any democratic leaders, and there was a moment, especially in the 90s, when elites in Ukraine and Russia tried to genuinely build democracy. It would be very hard for genuinely democratic leader to start a war if they not have these militarist instruments of conscription, military patriotic upbringing, highly militarized popular opinion, and so on and so on. So militarism prevailed over common sense, and after violent seizures of power in Kiev by Western-backed circles, in Crimea and Donbass by Russia-backed circles, the war was erupted. Natural question is how to resist the war non-violently. Of course, Jürgen's concept of conflict is perfectly compatible with a win-win stage of conflict. It may include disagreements, debates, non-violent actions, but nothing more radical. I define peace as dynamics of life free from violence, which is harm doing. Violence is basically doing harm. So what Jürgen calls a conflict with intention to take control in conflict non-violently, it is ambitious, of course, I like it. But anyway, I prefer to call non-violent conflict peace, okay? And instead of escalating conflict, we need to escalate peace. But probably it could mean also escalating non-violent conflict in Dr. Jorgensen's word. So we know what militarists mean when they talk what they want peace. Peace formula of President Zelensky, it is like, give me what I want and there will be peace. Yeah, Putin the same and even more, because Putin wants basically a great power in world affairs. We see results of this attitude in the escalation ladder. But imagine if we can go through escalation ladder in the opposite direction, not down, but high to the world without war. Imagine if, for example, Russians and Ukrainians refused to kill each other. Peace talks started to find common ground. Disarmament was preferred to pressure, reconciliation preferred to deterrence. Both Ukraine and Russia seek fair deal, not just play for time or have any other clandestine strategies. hatred forgotten and agreement achieved. This and all other peoples became closer. Ukrainians, Russians, Americans, Chinese people, all the people in the world, Europeans anyway, Africans. Common interests and natural unity are not denied, and nobody and nothing ignored or abused. This is indeed escalation ladder in opposite direction, starting from refusal to kill. It is very important. I will say a few words about it. And this looks like real formula of peace, not this Putin's or Zelensky's long lists of pretexts and excuses to wage war forever. Of course, this steps towards peace indeed is nonviolent resistance to war, what we are discussing today. But I must say that nonviolent resistance now is on crossroads, and you can see it on these two pictures. A picture on the left is from action in Kiev. It is protesting under mayor office of Kiev, and main slogan is weapons instead of cobblestones. Spend all money on weapons, spend all money on army, on the victory. You know, recently Zelensky said, people will not tolerate elections during the martial law because people want all money should be given to army, to victory. So this is so-called nonviolent action for victory in war, for the army, for militarism. It is one sort of nonviolent action, and another sort of nonviolent action you could see at the right. It is action in New York, and people are with more mature and experienced slogans, not this naive militarism, but what people really want. Negotiations, yes. Escalations, no. Money for job and education, not for war and occupation. Stop military spending, fund people needs, and so on. Because indeed, when war is protracted, people are paying for the war with their welfare. And of course, I am not even saying about environmental damage. Once I heard from environmental activist such thought, if they will continue their war for Crimea, what they will do when Crimea will be flooded because of climate change? Interesting question. So we have a hope of nonviolent resistance which could replace war, but when we are talking about current forms of nonviolent resistance in Ukraine, there, for example, in wonderful research of Philip Daza published by Novakt, I know you can find a lot of videos on internet, and probably some sort of video also have organizers of this conference. Anyway, examples of nonviolent resistance in Ukraine are usually focused on such extreme examples as this famous tank man in China in the end of 80s previous century. And we had such things when unarmed communities stopped Russian tanks during full-scale invasion. We had just community standing at the way of tanks. In 2022, but interestingly, earlier in eastern Ukraine, also unarmed people stopped Ukrainian tanks, and of course, on Ukrainian side, this nonviolent action considered as treason. But in both such impressive cases, problem is solidarity of civilians with army. And during these violent seizures of power, which was the first step to current war, it is also problem was solidarity with army. And this solidarity of civilians with army is especially problematic, became especially problematic in 2014, because when Ukrainian civilians support Ukrainian army, it is legal. But when in 2014 pro-Russian circles were agitated under influence of Russian propaganda and supported Russian occupation of Crimea and Donbass, it was contrary to international law, and it shows a serious problem with militarized pseudo nonviolence. You know that in Ukraine there is a yellow ribbon movement. It is resistance movement which operates in occupied territories. It makes pro-Ukrainian messages like yellow ribbons on public places. Look, Ukrainians are here. Writings on walls, sometimes scary ones, like beware, Ukrainian army is coming. Occupiers and collaborators will be eliminated. What you probably don't know is that whole yellow ribbon nonviolent resistance movement is run by special operation forces of Ukrainian army, and they are used mostly for intelligence and sabotage. They provide to army names and targets to hit. When I asked recently representative of yellow ribbon to speak on this very conference, on this very panel, his first reply was, erase yourself from traitors database, the peacemaker, and then we will talk. But he quickly sent me another email. It says, I have read your message to the end. No, no way. And I scrolled and found last paragraph, and last paragraph in my letter was a question, how I can support yellow ribbon nonviolent resistance without supporting army, because I am a pacifist and I can't support army. For the yellow ribbon, nonviolent action is just another weapon of war, so it is theoretically nonviolent character in practice seems not to be nonviolent at all. And by the way, absolutely the same problems we could see among people who claim to support Russian identity nonviolently, but they supported separatism in Crimea and Donbass. They supported basically Russian army, and the same situation, so-called nonviolence, led to big violence. So we need to understand that it is not enough to act nonviolently. It is also necessary to be nonviolent by our identity, by our culture, because culture is a key. It is culture of peace and nonviolence, or it is culture of militarism and endless war. Nonviolent resistance of people with violent identities, like total commitment to support of army, could not really lead to peace. And you know, talking about some not very studied, not properly reported ways of nonviolent resistance to war in Ukraine, it is things which are condemned by corporate media, like, for example, so-called draft evasion, so-called defeatism, but it is things people are just telling truth what is going on, and people just don't want to go to meet Grinder. And there are also ways how to reconcile these messages of common sense and commonsensical behavior with mainstream militarist attitudes. For example, you could see some attempts in mild transformation in militarist discourse. For example, some people are saying that Ukraine should not be like Russia, and some democracy should be preserved even during the war. It is very mild, but it is allowed in mainstream corporate media. So some people are resisting this militarization, this loss of democracy. They insist Ukraine should be democratic, should be better than Russia in this aspect.
Hey, Yurii.
People are talking about common sense and national interests, restrain rhetorics of war, say raise human rights issues. Advocates are talking how to preserve human rights, procedural rights during the military draft. Lawyers are helping people to avoid demobilization. And anti-corruption activists, not those who ask people to commit all money to war, but those who say, you see, these military recruiters are profiting from war. Let's stop them. This sort of anti-corruption activists are very constructive.
Hey, Yurii, we are just about reaching our time. Just wanted to let you know.
Okay, thank you. I will try to be brief. One moment. Solidarity with armies will never get us to peace. We need to develop nonviolent identity of civilians, reasonable persons, truth tellers, peace educators, peace builders, focus on nonviolent way of life and big changes. And I think fundament of this nonviolent identity could be a vision that in the world where everybody refuses to kill, there will be no wars. And Ukrainian Pacifist Movement works a lot to help conscientious objectors to military service. You could find some reports about situation in Ukraine because Ukrainian army not recognize Ukrainian commitments according to international human rights law. Ukraine should respect right to conscientious objection, but is not respecting it. Ukrainian army just disregards this right. So we are helping people to uphold this right. In New York Times, you could, in this article, you see at this slide, you could read some experiences of people. You know, on Monday, this Monday, soldier conscripted against his will, Andriy Vishnevetsky, will have hearings in Supreme Court. Recently, he, by the way, Vishnevetsky lodged very courageous lawsuit to President Zelensky, asking him to establish a procedure of discharge from military service on the ground of conscience. There is no such procedure now. And also we helped another very brave man, Christian pacifist, Vitaly Alexeyenko, prisoner of conscience. Supreme Court with our legal aid helped him, released him from prison. We are continuing to this work, and Zaira helped to inform the world about this situation. So thanks to Zaira. Now I am coming to the end of my presentation, and as you know, I am persecuted for this very dream of the world without wars, of the world where all causes of war are removed. And you know, enemy image in Ukraine is cultivated by the media. They scare people with some fairy tales that if someone pushing Ukraine for peace, it could end badly. But when we adopted peace agenda for Ukraine and the world, we not only propose proposed and asserted our pacifist vision, but we basically said what whole world knows, that there is criminal Russian aggression, and of course it should be condemned, but according to international law, all parties to conflicts should seek peaceful end of any conflicts, and all conflicts should be resolved without violence. United Nations General Assembly in its resolution called for peaceful resolution of conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We said it. We said some general truths like all images of enemy are not realistic, and expert of security service of Ukraine, which received to analysis our statement, said, it is justifying Russian aggression if you are criticizing image of enemy, which has nothing to do with definition of aggression adopted by United Nations General Assembly in 1974. It is very unprofessional, and the whole this prosecution is just not correct, even according to Ukrainian law. I'm not saying even about international standards. But what this persecution teaches us, this persecution for a dream about the world where everybody refuses to kill and there are no wars, it leads us to the darkest parts of collective soul, where we must get anyway with a light of truth and love. So if even this absurd will result very badly, I think that this experience in the end will help us to develop nonviolent action, and will help Ukraine to overcome naivety and warmongering commitments which go far beyond of common sense. So how to make this dream happen? Of course, peace agenda is still topical. We indeed need to end the war by peaceful means, and it means that we must uphold human right to refuse to kill. We must tell the truth, because truth unites us and lies help some not very skilled rulers to divide and rule. And we must learn and teach practical knowledge about peaceful life without violence or with its minimization. And alternative global security system, alternative to war, developed in World Beyond War, is very important set of principles. But what I need to add to this is that paradigm of nonviolent resistance need two important understanding. First, we must resist to bad behavior, not to people. We should not make enemies. We should resist crime. We should resist war, but we should not make enemies from everyone and hurt everyone, any actors. And another important thing is that we always should be focused on change, not destruction of some power structures which could be unfair, but it is always better to transform, to awake conscience of people. It is not productive to seek destruction of enemies, even in non-violent ways. It is always important to make friends from enemies. we need constructive resistance, resilience and regeneration, as we told last year. I would call it nonviolent revolution, or rather evolution, transformation of the world for better. It is delusional to think that small changes like return to the past or victory in war could change the world for better. Only big changes towards nonviolent governance, change in way of thinking and organization of social life, getting rid of burden of militarism in politics and economy could change world for better. So let's build war without war together.
Wonderful words. Yurii, thank you so much for inspiring us. And with that, we would love to pass it on to Zaira.
Thank you very much to everyone for inviting me, and thank you to all the participants for being here with us and sharing more about this important topic. Thank you also to my colleagues who just spoke before me. So I would like just to start by introducing a new topic, which is pertaining to our discussion. We have been talking about non-violence, we have been talking about non-violent resistance, non-collaboration, and of course also about peace. And I'm going to share with you a new topic. Okay, I hope you can see. So the topic that I would like to introduce with you today is the human right to conscientious objection to military service. As we talk about war, we see worldwide peace movements and activists calling for the end of the war. And when we think about this, there are many people in conflict, armed conflict areas who decide to break their weapons, not to hold weapons. They refuse to kill, they refuse to learn how to kill. The right to conscientious objection to military service is a human right. It is inherent to the Article 18 about the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Thus is a human right, and it does work regardless of what different countries may think about. This means that it's not derogable and is universal. Unfortunately, the problem, as we can see in Ukraine, is that this right has been suspended. This is illegal because it's a human right, and as a human right, cannot be derogated. Something else I would like to point out is also that the right to conscientious objection to military service is directly linked to the right to peace and to the right to life. And conscientious objectors are actually the ones who are actively exercising the right to life. So it is very important for those who are advocating for these human rights to highlight these links. And this is also very useful for the conscientious objectors as they fight to protect their rights, and for all those organizations and groups who are working for the full implementation of this right. Unfortunately, some countries do not recognize yet this right. Some other countries do recognize this right, but the right is not fully implemented, which means there are still discrimination for conscientious objectors. This was the case of Ukraine before war, when only the members to 10 recognized religious groups could apply for alternative civil service. The problem is that with the breaking of the war, this right has been suspended in Ukraine. And something else also very interesting is that the situation in Europe is quite concerning. And as we talk about the war in Ukraine, we also need to take in account what is going on in Belarus as well as in Russia. For your information, I would like just to point out that every year, the European Bureau for Conscientious Objection does publish a report of the situation of the human right to conscientious objection in all the European countries. So you are more than welcome to visit our website and to learn more about what's the current situation. Something interesting about Ukraine is that this right has been suspended, actually the conscription has been suspended for a short period of time, and it has been reintroduced. This is an important lesson for each one of us, because this means that even if the conscription may be suspended, it is still important to work on the right to conscientious objection. It's still important to work on the conscience and freedom of conscience, so that people, young people in particular, who have less experience on this, may be able to freely choose what to do in case they are called up to war. And now let me talk more about what's going on in Ukraine. We do have a lot of testimonies of people who refuse to serve in the military. As you know, first of all, there has been a ban right at the beginning of the war, and all male between 18 years old and 60 years old are forbidden to leave the country. So right at the beginning of the breaking of the war, we heard German newspaper, they reported about 2 young people, Sasha and Nikita, who were stranded in Lviv because they didn't want to participate in the war because they were pacifists, they are pacifists, and they were not allowed to leave the country, so they were internally displaced. This is the first news that we heard right at the beginning of the war. As Yurii already mentioned, we are aware of several cases of conscientious objectors, and they have been persecuted, and some have been also jailed. And I would like to talk to you about Vitali. This is a special campaign that we did launch together with the European Bureau for Conscientious Objection, I4, WRI, and Connection to ask for freedom for Vitali. Vitali is a Protestant person, and he refused for conscience, for religious reasons. And he was jailed on February 23, after he was sentenced to 1 year of jail in September. And the appeal was rejected. And thanks to international campaign, thanks to the work of the Ukrainian Pacifist Movements, finally, eventually, he has been freed last May, on May 25th. It is very important to support the conscientious objectors. They do take a stand against violence. They do take a personal stand against war, and they are ready to pay the consequences according to the local laws. So in particular, Vitali, when he was asked, he said, I do know that at the moment, the local law sentences me to jail, but to me, my commitment to God is stronger. So even though I'm going through a lot of challenges, I'm at peace with my conscience. And this is the kind of strength that conscientious objectors do have. And this is also the reason why they do need support, because most of the time they are left alone. There are some other cases. I'm just listing some of them without going into details. For example, we have Andriy Vishnevetsky. He is a Christian, and he is a member of the Ukrainian Pacifist Movement, and he has been held at the front line against his conscience. So he clearly stated that he is a conscientious objector, and he is being kept at the front line. And as Yurii mentioned, right after I4, I was able to deliver a statement at the Human Rights Council last March, addressing the case of Andriy. He was given a 10 days leave. So this is just a little small experience, a small proof that international solidarity does work. So this is an encouragement for all of us to continue to support all conscientious objectors everywhere, and in particular now in Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. This is just an example of things that we can do. This is from an Italian rally a simple banner with the word peace, not war, and of course, not weapons, because this is consistency for the peace movement. And at the international level, we did launch an international campaign, the Object campaign, to call the European institutions and European countries to protect conscientious objectors and deserters from Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. There is an online petition we can share in the chat, the link. You are all more than welcome to sign. We are reaching 50,000 signatures. And last May, on May 15, which is the International Day of Conscientious Objection, this signature have been handed down to the European Commission in Berlin. The petition is still ongoing. We can all be part of it and support it. It's also a way to raise awareness, because something important is also to inform about all these struggles of conscientious objectors and raise awareness on the human right to conscientious objection. On May 15, the following day, in Italy, we did have a rally in front of the Ukrainian, Russian, and Belarusian embassy, and then we did have a press conference at the parliament. These are just little examples, because as we are today presenting what's going on in Ukraine, it's also important that what is going on there is spread elsewhere, everywhere, so that we can show support. And this is the current campaign. Yurii mentioned about his personal individual case. So there is a campaign, Free Peace Speech, in solidarity with Yurii, as Yurii, as the secretary of the Ukrainian Pacifist Movement, has been supporting all these conscientious objectors, also with Amicus Curiae, which is very important, together with international observer. And I would like to thank John for being in Kiev during the hearing of Yurii. International observers are also very important, and these are just I'm just listing very quickly a few examples of things that also the international peace movement can do, could do, to support conscientious objectors and to make them feel that they are not left alone. And in conclusion, I would like to thank you, and also to remind that when we talk about nonviolence, we are talking about alternative to violence, and breaking of weapons is the most concrete, realistic action that a person can do whenever he's called to war. And we may not be in the same situation, but we can support this choice, which is actually not just a choice, is not just an appeal from us, but this is a human right, which is and should be universal and not derogable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zaira. Really amazing things you shared, and things I think all of us wish our media would actually show a lot more than they do. Now, our time still remains, as someone mentioned in the chat, even though we did go a little over time, this is the last event for today. And so anyone who is able to stay, please do, because we will have some time for Q&A with all of our panelists. And so we will begin with some of the questions now that have been dropped into the Q&A box. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And some of the questions have been answered in text form already, so you can view some of those answers in the Q&A box, and we will try to get to these other questions. So the first question, it's directed at Zaira, but I think anyone can answer as well, which is, why hasn't the UN taken more of a leadership role in promoting peaceful solutions to conflict between countries?
Thank you very much for this question. I think this is a very important topic, so thank you for the person raising this. The first things that we need to say is that the UN is an intergovernmental organization. This means that what the UN does and what the UN does not depends on what the member states want to do and don't want to do. So if the UN is missing to do something, is lacking at the international level, that's because this is the will of the majority of the member states. I think we need to be very clear about this, because as citizens of different countries and member states, we should call for accountability of our own governments. They can take action within the UN. And something else that I would like to add is also that regardless the fact that the UN needs to be reformed in a more democratic way, and there are things that needs to be improved, it is still the only place currently which can allow multilateralism. So it's the only way, it's the only place where all member states can gather, discuss, and decide. So this is partially an answer to the question, but the other part of the answer is that the UN, and when I talk UN, I'm talking more about the office of the UN, the office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. They are doing their part. For example, during the Human Rights Council session, we do have the High Commissioner reporting on the current situation in Ukraine. And this is not happening just now that there is a war. It did happen also before the war. And I took the floor several times as IFOR to report on what was going on in the Ukraine. And now with the breaking of the war, there is a commission of inquiry. So we do have experts who do report to the plenary. The member states can make statements, and civil society representative can also as well make statements. So this is a very important place to protect, to be able to take action, because as we see too more often, there are some member states who do prefer clubs of G7, G20, which is a restricted group of member states who try to decide for the entire world. This is not multilateralism, and this is not nonviolent principle, which is about involving all concerned people in the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to another question. It's directed at Yurii, but again, anyone can chime in too. What are the risks to presenting information like has been presented on today's panel, to you personally, Yurii, or to anyone on this panel?
Risks are that Security Service of Ukraine will record it. They probably do it anyway, because I don't know, there was a search and they probably plant some bugs, and they probably hear what I'm saying. I am convinced I'm saying perfectly legal things, but some expert could write any nonsense in some new forensic linguistic conclusion, and it could end in some another nonsensical accusations. Anyway, I think that today we are talking about nonviolent resistance, and part of it is to be public, to show those who used to be violent with impunity that world is watching. Not many people, victims of systemic violence, have such opportunity. I see David asked me in the context of escalation, wrote about civil rights activists who come to towns where police is likely to attack them. But you know, civil rights activists rather they didn't escalate conflict. They revealed scope of existing systemic violence publicly, taking the hit instead of others. I think this example demonstrates ideas that we need to de-escalate, not escalate, and the truth telling helping the world to see what is going on, being in the center of attention, acting non-violently, and even if we know that there could be a weird, irrational reaction, it is a way to de-escalate. It is a way to say truth. It is a way to reveal, and in result, it must lead to less violence.
Thank you, Yurii. And thanks to all of our panelists who are writing answers while you're talking as well. So there are some typed answers to these questions. You can check that out in the Q&A box. Another question here from Amy. Is the desire by competing empires to control the melting Arctic opportunities, the North Sea route, extraction of resources like fossil fuels, is this a major factor in driving this war? Any responses to that? Did anyone want to chime in on that one?
It is about environmental impact of war, right?
Yeah, and the geopolitical factors driving the conflict, like control of resources.
We need to understand that all natural riches of our planet should serve welfare of all people, and it would not be fair if someone use natural goods to devastate nature, like fuel tanks with some fossil, some gas from, anyway, we need to understand that common problems of humankind are environmental problems, climate change, lack of harmony in relations of humans with nature. This is plastic, for example, animals dying. It is disastrous. Many things should be resolved, and it is just wrong that instead of building better relations between people and between humans and nature, we are just killing each other. It must be changed. Also, it is admirable when, despite so exacerbated situation with lack of harmony in relation of humans and nature, many environmental activists are committed to nonviolent action. There is a lot of angriness. There is a lot of understanding how badly are behaving militarized corporations, and we know that war is not green. This horrible possibility of any accident in the Zaporizhzhya nuclear power plant, this disastrous flood after destruction of Novokakhovka Dam, it is examples that militarism is harmful for nature, and we must change our attitudes, must get rid of militarism to save our not only social but also environmental welfare, indeed for not destroy life on the planet by war making.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yurii. So we are going to wrap up soon. Thank you again to our panelists for answering almost all of the questions. Do check out those written answers if you haven't yet in the Q&A box. Charles, I'm going to pass it back to you if you have any final questions or final thoughts.
Yeah, just want to thank again the panelists. Thank you to World Beyond War for bringing us together. And thank you to everyone who attended. And if you would like to continue the conversation, please do contact any of us. I think if you didn't get a chance to hear your question answered, or if you think of new questions, you know, this war unfortunately continues, and but the creativity of figuring out how to stop it continues. So we appreciate these questions that are going to continue to come in. And with that, gratitude to everyone. Be safe, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. And we do have time for networking and expo booths. We actually have more than 15 minutes. It's not going to close you out. So if you want to stay on, that's totally fine. This window is going to close in a second once I end this. But then you can click on the Expo tab in your lobby screen that will be behind this window. You can click Expo, and then you'll see all the different Expo booths. We have a session reflections booth. We encourage the speakers to go to the session reflection booth if you have time, and you can talk with our speakers further. We also have many booths for our sponsoring organizations, so you can check those out and talk with our sponsors as well as other attendees. So please do take the time to do that. And then we will see you back for the third day of the conference, third and final day, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern time. We'll begin with some booths and networking, and then our first panel tomorrow will be at 2:30 Eastern time, and we'll be talking about community and land-based resistance. So that will be a very interesting panel as well. So thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.